So the level of differentiation affects everything. It affects longevity, marital stability, reproduction, health, educational accomplishments, and occupational success. If you look at a family that has, a range of success, often it's differentiation that can account for that. A highly differentiated person that is a true adult, they have stable families, they're interdependent, they contribute to society. They can be empathic, but yet be hands-off. And maybe most importantly, the action that they take is based on an accurate perception of reality. And on the next slide, I'm going to show you some cognitive distortions that are quite common in addiction and also quite common on poorly differentiated people. So poorly differentiated people act younger than their age. They have chaotic personal lives and are often underfunctioning. They could be overfunctioning as well, either side of that. And depending on others to sustain them, or in the case of an overfunctioner, depending on others to focus on. And often not taking responsibility for their actions, and being overly optimistic or overly pessimistic, but not really seeing reality exactly as it is. Cognitive distortion or twisted thinking is a more lay term for that has you distort the nature of reality, the nature of your own identity, the nature of your own contributions. And all these things also interfere with relationships because they're off a little bit. So the first one is all or nothing thinking. It's looking at things in absolute black or white categories. It's really useful to, when you're getting triggered by something, to actually write down what you're triggered about. Because until you write it down, it's not really stabilized in your mind. And then, we end up going over and over it. But once you write down what you're triggered by and check these cognitive distortions or twisted thinking, you'll see that you use a couple of them all the time. So like all or nothing thinking, it's either I'm a huge success or I'm a total failure. Rather than, I've done some great things in my life and some things haven't worked out so well. So overgeneralization, these are all somehow a little bit related, but it's viewing a single negative event as a never-ending pattern of defeat. So overgeneralization, let's say you got fired from a job. And so you conclude from that you'll never hold another job. Even if you got another job, you're probably going to get fired because that's what happens to a person like you. So it's a distortion. So the third one is mental filter. You dwell on the negatives and ignore the positives. This could be about yourself or others. Somebody's late, you focus on that and get very critical about it rather than seeing that it's part of, and not that you wouldn't ask the person to change, but I'm talking about being victimized, feeling victimized by somebody who's constantly late. And ignoring all the positives that are there, such as they like hanging out, or they're interesting, or they're your good friend. They've been a good friend for a long time. And you can also do a mental filter on yourself. It could be as simple as a bad hair day, that everybody's going to shun you because your hair doesn't look right. Or, if you raise your hand in a group and maybe the leader says something like that, that's not an appropriate question, that you could just go down in shame. You're just a horrible person for asking that question. Discounting the positive, you insist your positive qualities don't count. So if you've ever tried to compliment somebody who has this cognitive distortion, you can't do it because they're like Teflon, like nothing gets through. They cannot accept a positive word about themselves. And in their own mind, that's their experience. Like, oh, they see that about me, but that's not true. I know that I know I'm not a good person, or I know I'm not smart, or I know I'm not competent. So anything somebody tells from the outside just doesn't get in. And jumping to conclusions can take the form of either mind reading or fortune telling. So mind reading happens a lot that you feel so certain that you know what other people are thinking, even though they haven't said, or maybe they have a certain look on their face and you think that, oh, they're angry at me. And really they just have an upset stomach or something. And fortune telling, it's predicting, for example, that people always leave you, or you always get fired, or the boss always picks on you. So you're constantly in the future tripping and thinking that things are going to turn out badly for you. Number 6 is having too much of a Pollyanna outlook. So it's avoiding action because the seriousness of the situation isn't seen accurately. So this can happen a lot in addiction, where either the person who's addicted or the rest of the family kind of really brushes it off and rationalize it, that it's really not that bad, or the eating disorder is not that bad, even though they weigh 90 pounds and you can see their bones. With that too positive an outlook, that nothing is done, and kind of a minimization of the problem. And 7, kind of the opposite, it's the sky is falling, so it's an overinterpreting of the danger and situation. So somebody that every time they get in the car, they think they're going to have a flat tire, and they're calling everybody and acting as if it's going to be dangerous, and they need to be checked because something bad might happen. They might have a heart attack, they might have a panic attack, they might have a flat tire, or if they do have a flat tire, it's the worst thing ever and they're never going to recover from it. So kind of getting the whole system on high alert for even a fairly mundane thing. Emotional reasoning is you reason from your feelings. So you feel like a loser. For example, I feel like a loser, so I must be one. And number 9 is shoulding yourself. So saying I should, I ought to, I must, I shouldn't have, I have to, rather than using language such as I choose. I choose to exercise, I choose to eat the right food. The more you should yourself, the more unlikely you're going to be able to do what you want to do. Because the should sets up an internal dynamic within you that part of you saying I should, and another part's going, no, I'm not going to, I don't have to. And it goes the same for talking to other people, using those shoulds and oughts and must. You must come home. Well, we don't have that power over people. So, a healthier way is talking about your own feelings and needs. I love it when you're home, or I need you to be home because blah, blah, blah. And of course, the person could say yes or no to that. So number 10 is labeling. Instead of I made a mistake, you tell yourself, I'm such a loser. So a lot of times we're talking to ourselves in these internal dialogues all the time, like telling ourselves we're stupid, that we don't make sense, that idiot, you're a loser, everybody can see it. Or you're labeling other people, like some of our politicians are doing lately. And it's just never true. It's like making a caricature out of a complex individual, that we're never just one thing. No one's just one thing. But it has a very powerful effect to say this to yourself. And by the way, these cognitive distortions there's 100% probability, if a person is depressed, that they're using cognitive distortions. And when you write down the actual mood log, like the whole thing, like what's the situation that's disturbing? What are you telling yourself about it? What's an equally true statement of what might be happening? That the person's mood shifts immediately. Like the brain shifts right when you believe the antidote to the cognitive distortion. It doesn't take any time. So the last ones are self-blame and other blame. Self-blame is blaming yourself for something that you weren't entirely responsible for. Other blame is blaming other people and overlooking ways that you contributed to the problem. So usually interpersonal problems are at least some percent both people, whether it's 10-90, 199, 50-50, 40-60. It's pretty much never just one person. It's helpful to watch yourself, like, how do you do this? Do you take the self-blame and always put yourself down, or are you pointing the finger out, blaming others for things that you don't like to have it be happening? The reason that I put these in there is because I think that they're linked to the phenomena of differentiation. If you're distorting reality all the time, you don't see yourself or other people accurately. And so if you're blaming other people, then it's taking off the growth opportunity off of yourself so that you don't have to feel bad about yourself. And if you're constantly blaming yourself, then you're making yourself so depressed that you really don't have the energy to stand up for yourself. It's completely energy draining to engage in this kind of thinking. And it's a fairy tale. So one of the huge things about becoming differentiated is staying in reality. So we actually live in a culture that encourages us to never be in reality, that we're always supposed to be shopping and consuming and drinking and eating and never just sitting with the reality of what we're feeling or the reality of our family or the reality of whatever's happening with ourselves. It's like we're just so many ways to get off the spot, get off the discomfort. And so these distortions and the family emotional process, as I said, they repeat from generation to generation. There's a couple of books about the Kennedy family, which has a lot of addiction in it, a lot over many, many generations. They made their original fortune from alcohol during the Prohibition. So a lot of alcohol abuse and drug abuse. 2 books about it, Moments of Clarity and A Common Struggle. And I believe both of those authors were ostracized by their family. Their family was not happy to see these books be published. And so it's an example of the kind of courage that it takes to, in those cases, those adult children are doing something different that breaks this pattern of both alcohol and substance abuse, but also of not telling the truth about it, never talking about it, breaking the no talk rule. So unless somebody does this, and I'm sure they probably had some therapy or treatment, I know they did, unless somebody does some kind of psychological work, that these patterns are just going to keep going throughout the generations. Any work that any person does has the potential to make a big impact on the whole system. So the bottom line about family emotional process and differentiation is that the most severe human problems, as well as the highest levels of adaptation, are generations deep and have everything to do with differentiation and individuation. And so the term know thyself becomes more poignant. One more thing that I've been thinking about, that during the Civil War, I think it was General Grant had an order that his soldiers not read any kind of fiction, because he felt like it took their consciousness away from the seriousness of what they were doing, and that they needed to be completely aware, completely sober, if you will, to use that word, and not lost in fantasy. Because if they were lost in fantasy, that they weren't as capable of fighters as they were, and that they needed to stay focused on what they were fighting for to be the strongest warriors that they could be. So it's interesting, like in our culture, how not that way we all are, we're on our devices and movies and podcasts and music and shopping and all of the things that we do to tune out of everyday reality.